People think a safe house sounds a certain way. Quiet, calm, predictable. That night taught me that a normal house can sound exactly the same right before everything breaks apart. I went to my boyfriend's place late, close to midnight, after a long day where nothing interesting had happened. We were tired in that dull way that makes you want noise in the background, but no real conversation. His house felt familiar, comfortable, and small enough to feel controlled, like nothing could hide inside it without being noticed. We sat on the couch with the lights off, the TV filling the room with lazy sounds we weren't really paying attention to. We weren't drunk, we weren't distracted, and nothing felt off. That detail matters because people always assume you miss warning signs. That night, there weren't any clear ones. At some point, the movie kept playing while we stopped watching. The house settled into that late-night stillness where every small sound feels louder, but not threatening yet. That was the last moment where everything felt normal. The first noise came from the backyard, and it wasn't loud enough to scare me right away. It sounded like something brushing against wood, brief and careless, the kind of noise you could explain away without much effort. My boyfriend muted the TV and looked at me, waiting to see my reaction before choosing his own. He got up slowly, not acting brave, just cautious, and grabbed his phone to use the flashlight. I stayed on the couch, listening to his steps as he crossed the room and opened the back door. Cold air came in, and for a second, the house felt exposed in a way I couldn't explain. He scanned the yard, checking the fence and the corners, moving the light back and forth until he seemed satisfied. There was nothing there, no movement, no shape, no sound. He locked the door carefully and pulled the blind all the way down before coming back. We tried to joke it off, tried to force the night back into its place. And the movie started again. I leaned back against the couch, telling myself that fear didn't belong there, even though my attention stayed fixed on the hallway. The second noise didn't come from outside. It came from inside the house, deeper, closer, from one of the bedrooms we weren't using. This time, my body reacted before my brain did. My chest tightened, and I sat up straight, listening harder than I wanted to. The sound wasn't clear enough to name, but it didn't belong there, and that alone was enough to make my skin crawl. My boyfriend stood up again, slower now, and it didn't joke this time. He walked down the hallway, checking each room with more care, opening doors fully, leaning inside, and looking under the bed like he expected something to be there. I stayed where I was, staring down the dark hallway, counting his steps. He came back and said he didn't see anything, but his voice didn't sound confident. He sat beside me, closer than before, and turned the volume down instead of muting it completely, like he didn't want silence to take over. There was a long pause, long enough to feel wrong, where nothing happened and no one moved. The hallway light stayed on, and the bedroom door behind him remained open, empty and quiet in a way that made my stomach tighten. The man wearing a clown mask rushed out of the bedroom without making a sound. He grabbed my boyfriend from behind and slammed him into the wall hard enough to shake the frame. The impact was violent and sudden, and the sound it made was deep and heavy like furniture breaking. My boyfriend screamed as the intruder wrapped his arms around his chest and dragged him backward into the bedroom. My boyfriend tried to fight, scraping his shoes against the floor and reaching for the door frame, but the intruder was stronger and pulled him inside with terrifying ease. The door slammed shut, cutting off the light and leaving the hallway dark. I didn't scream. I didn't freeze. I ran. I ran into the kitchen, forcing myself to think through the panic, and grabbed the largest knife I could find from the counter. My grip wasn't steady, and I had to stop myself from dropping it as the sounds from the bedroom grew louder and more desperate. Before I could decide what to do, the bedroom door cracked open, and my boyfriend's hand slid out onto the hallway floor, shaking and covered in blood. His fingers clawed at the ground as he screamed my name and told me to get out while I still could. I turned toward the front door, but my foot caught the edge of the rug and sent me crashing down. The knife flew from my hand and skidded across the floor out of reach. I barely had time to push myself up before something grabbed my ankles and dragged me backward with force. The clown mask filled my vision as the intruder pulled me across the floor. I kicked, twisted, and screamed, landing a hard blow against his chest that made him loosen his grip for just a second. That second was enough for me to roll away, scramble to my feet, and run down the hallway. I threw myself into the bathroom and slammed the door shut, locking it with shaking hands and pressing my body against it. The house went quiet for a moment, and that silence felt heavier than the noise that came before it. I pulled out my phone and called 911, whispering the address and telling them someone was inside the house, that my boyfriend was hurt, and that I was locked in the bathroom with no way out. My voice shook as I spoke, and I could barely hear the operator over my own breathing. While I was on the phone, my boyfriend started screaming again, louder and closer than before. He begged for help, called my name over and over, and his voice cracked in a way that made it clear he was losing strength. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep myself from making noise as tears ran down my face. Then something slammed into the bathroom door with enough force to make it bend inward. The handle rattled violently as heavy blows followed one after another, each hit making the door shake harder. I screamed into the phone that the door wasn't going to hold and that they needed to hurry because there wasn't much time left. The banging sound continued, mixed with scraping sounds against the door, and I pushed my shoulder into it, trying to keep it closed while my legs slid across the floor. I could hear my boyfriend crying now, his voice breaking as he begged for someone to open the door and help him. Suddenly, everything stopped. No banging, no scraping, no screaming. Just silence so complete that it made my ears ring. I stayed there holding my breath, terrified that any sound from me would bring the intruder back. The operator told me police were close. A few minutes later, I heard sirens outside, distant at first and then louder, and relief hit me so hard that I started sobbing without control. The fear of being trapped finally broke me. I unlocked the door and stepped into the hallway, calling my boyfriend's name as I moved forward, desperate to see him alive. He was lying directly behind the bathroom door, his body blocking the space where I had been hiding. His eyes were open, staring past me, and his hands were raw and bloody from pounding on the door. In that moment, I understood everything. He hadn't been trying to break in. He had been trying to get away. If I had opened the door when he begged, he would have survived. I dropped to my knees beside him and touched his shoulder, knowing before I did it that he wouldn't respond. When I leaned closer, I saw his mouth clearly. His tongue was gone. I screamed, the sound tearing out of me as the front door burst open and police flooded the house with guns raised and voices shouting. They searched every room, every corner, the yard, and the street outside. They never found the man in the clown mask. The police told me intruders like that sometimes disappear without a trace. They told me I followed procedure by staying hidden and calling for help. They told me there was nothing I could have done differently. I don't believe them. I still hear the pounding of the door when everything is quiet. I still hear him calling my name, begging me to open it. And I know that safety doesn't always mean survival. In 2020, a man wearing a clown mask forced his way into a home in Detroit, USA, attacked a woman with a weapon, and fired shots inside the house before fleeing with the victim's cash. Police described him as wearing a clown mask and a dark hoodie, and the victim was hospitalized in stable condition after the attack. The first thing people should understand is that this trip didn't start with hope. It started because staying home with him had become unbearable. We were already fighting long before the car was packed, long before the road stretched in front of us, and long before I convinced myself that a few days away might calm him down. He drove the entire time, gripping the steering wheel like it belonged to him and him alone, deciding when we stopped, what we ate, and when we spoke. Every attempt at conversation ended with him correcting me, mocking me, or turning my words against me, so I learned to stay quiet and stare out the window. We stopped in a restaurant on the side of the road. The sign was old, the paint was cracked, and there were no other cars parked nearby. It didn't look closed, but it didn't look open either. It looked like time had stopped there and never bothered to come back. Inside, everything felt outdated and silent. One woman came out from the back, older, calm, and strangely attentive. She gave us menus and disappeared again. I remember thinking that if something went wrong in that place, there would be no one around to hear us. We sat there without talking, and the silence was sharp, not calm. He kept checking his phone, then watching me like he was waiting for a mistake. I focused on the menu even though I wasn't hungry, because looking at him felt dangerous. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I didn't even open the message right away, but when I did, I smiled without thinking. It was a coworker asking if I could come to his birthday the following week. A normal message, nothing hidden, nothing inappropriate. That small smile was enough. His face changed instantly, his voice getting louder as he demanded to know who had written to me. When I told him it was someone from work, his tone turned ugly, sharp and fast. He accused me of talking to other men, of embarrassing him, of cheating on him openly. He started shouting things that made people turn their heads, saying I was worthless, that I gave him nothing after everything he had done for me, that I didn't even deserve to be alive. He said all of this without lowering his voice, without shame, and with a look that told me he would have gone further if we were alone. He grabbed my phone and threw it into the trash like it was nothing. He leaned close and told me that during this trip, I wouldn't talk to anyone, and when we got home, we would have a serious conversation. I stood up shaking, walking toward the bathroom, and heard him yelling behind me to stop pretending and calling me a disgusting little rat. The hallway to the bathroom felt longer than it should have, and every step made me expect him to follow me, to grab me, or to drag me back to the table. Inside, I locked the door and leaned over the sink, trying to breathe without making noise. The tension built slowly because silence with him had never meant safety. I waited, listening for footsteps, for shouting, for the door handle to move, knowing from experience that privacy was something that he didn't respect. When the door finally opened, it wasn't him. It was the woman from the restaurant. She closed the door carefully and stood next to me without asking questions, as if she already knew exactly what was happening. She spoke calmly and told me about her past, about a man who hit her, humiliated her, and treated her like a servant. She explained how her life had revolved around pleasing him, feeding him, and staying quiet until she realized she was disappearing. She told me she left, that she built this place, and that no one controlled her anymore. I listened while my face burned with shame, because every word felt too familiar. I told her thank you, but I said there was nothing I could do, that this was just how things were for me. She looked at me seriously and said there was something to do, and that she could help. When she told me to follow her into the kitchen, my heart started racing. The kitchen was clean, quiet, and smelled like old oil and soap. She opened a cabinet and took out a small bottle with cloudy liquid, telling me this was the first ingredient to starting a new life, and that it was meant for rats like him. I told her I didn't understand and that I was scared. She leaned closer and told me I didn't need to understand everything, only that she would handle what came next, that she would take responsibility, and that my only job would be to leave and never come back. The tension pressed on me as I stood there, watching her hold the bottle, because every part of me knew how dangerous this was. But another part of me remembered every time he told me I was nothing, every time he hurt me, and then blamed me for it. She poured the liquid into his plate slowly without rushing, mixing it carefully into the food. Her hands didn't shake, and her face didn't change. She told me it was done, and that I should go back to the table and wait. Walking back felt unreal. He immediately complained about how long I had taken and asked what I was doing in there. I told him I didn't feel well, and he ignored me like my words didn't matter. The food arrived quickly, and he complained again, criticizing the place and the service. The woman told us to enjoy our meal, her voice steady and neutral. I couldn't eat. I watched him closely as he started eating, every moment making my chest tighten. He kept talking, kept insulting me for being quiet, accusing me of trying to make him look bad. Then his voice cut off mid-sentence. His fork slipped from his hand. His body leaned sideways. and he collapsed onto the floor, hitting it hard and staying completely still. I stayed frozen in my chair, staring at him, while the woman calmly looked at me and pointed toward the door. I stood up and walked out, leaving everything behind. Outside, the road was empty, and the silence felt unreal. I walked without knowing where I was going, constantly expecting to hear someone shouting my name or running after me. The tension didn't fade. Every sound made me turn around. My body felt light and heavy at the same time, and my thoughts wouldn't slow down. I reached the gas station far down the road and asked to use a phone. I told them my boyfriend collapsed at a restaurant and that I didn't know what happened. My voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. Later, people asked questions. I told them we argued often and that he scared me. I said I left because I didn't feel safe. They said the cause was poisoning, but when they returned to the restaurant, it was closed and empty, like no one had been there in years. The fear stayed with me long after everything ended. Interviews, nights alone, and sudden noises kept me on edge, waiting for consequences that never came. No charges followed. No accusations were made, and no one could explain where the woman or the restaurant had gone. They said there wasn't enough evidence to blame anyone. I moved away, changed jobs, and stopped answering unfamiliar numbers. Even now, raised voices make my body tense automatically. People like to believe escape is loud and heroic, but sometimes it happens quietly and it leaves confusion behind. I don't feel strong or in control. I feel like someone who survived because another person chose to intervene. Some nights, I still wonder how many other rats were served at that table before me. Money issues were everything in my life. Every morning started with the same routine, checking what little food was left and deciding which meal I could skip without passing out. I wasn't dramatic about it, but hunger changes how you think. It narrows your world until everything revolves around surviving the next few hours. The blood donation center wasn't something I searched for. It appeared in my path because I was already desperate enough to notice it. A small place, clean enough, offering food in exchange for blood. Not money, food. That detail mattered more than anything else at the time because it meant I could eat that same day. I didn't feel heroic or generous lying on that chair. I felt tired and embarrassed, staring at the ceiling while my arm went numb. When they handed me the sandwich and the juice, I ate standing up, barely tasting it. That was when I understood I could come back as many times as they let me. A few nights later, while browsing forums filled with things I didn't fully understand, I found a post that didn't belong anywhere else. It talked about private blood donations, high payments, no clinics involved. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, because some part of me already knew I was going to click. Before opening the page, I sat there, listening to my own breathing and the noise of my old computer fan. There was no excitement in that moment, only the weight of knowing that once I opened it, I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen it. That pause was the last clean moment I remember. The sight was simple, almost cold, almost empty, like it didn't want attention. It explained everything without decoration. Fresh blood only, collected at home, stored correctly, left in my mailbox at an exact time. Any delay would ruin the product and create problems. They didn't explain what those problems were. That lack of detail created a pressure that stayed with me. It wasn't fear yet, but it was close. The instructions were clear enough to feel professional, and that made them worse. This wasn't some random scam. It was organized. When I emailed them, the response came back almost immediately. They sent a list of supplies I had to buy and instructions so detailed they felt rehearsed. The payment amount was shocking. Enough to cover food, rent, and still have something left. I told myself I'd do it once just to get back on my feet. The first night I prepared everything, my apartment felt smaller than usual. I cleaned the table carefully, not out of pride, but because the instructions insisted on it. I kept reading them, afraid of missing something that would cost me the payment or worse. Before inserting the needle, I sat there for several minutes, staring at my arm. That pause stretched heavy and uncomfortable because my body clearly didn't want this, even if my mind had already decided. I forced myself to continue because stopping meant going back to hunger. The blood flowed slow at first, then steadier. I focused on breathing and keeping my hands from shaking. When the bag was full, I sealed it exactly as instructed, packed it with the cooling material, and placed it in the mailbox with my heart beating faster than it should have. The waiting afterward was unbearable. Every sound outside made me tense. When the mailbox was empty the next morning and the payment arrived shortly after, relief washed over me hard enough to make my legs weak. That relief is what trapped me. They asked for more blood the next time, offering even more money. I noticed my arm bruised faster. My recovery took longer, but I ignored it. Each successful pickup made the process feel normal, and that scared me more than the needles. Weeks passed, and my body began to protest in ways I couldn't ignore anymore. I woke up dizzy, my hands shaking, my legs heavy. Eating helped less each time, and sleeping didn't reset anything. I was always tired, no matter how much rest I got. Before each donation, there was a growing tension that filled the room. My breathing slowed, my mouth went dry, and my hands hesitated over the supplies. That moment before starting became longer every time because my body clearly understood something my mind refused to accept. The emails changed tone. They stopped thanking me. They started monitoring me. They commented on the quality and quantity of my blood, suggesting improvements like hydration schedules and rest periods. The payments kept increasing, making it harder to justify stopping. When I learned the blood was being consumed, not processed, my stomach turned. That knowledge stuck with me during every donation afterward, making the act feel heavier and more invasive. Still, I continued because stopping meant losing everything I had rebuilt. When I finally told them I was done, my message was short and desperate. I explained I was sick, weak, and couldn't continue. The reply came back colder than anything before. They told me stopping wasn't an option and that continued cooperation was expected. I disconnected my computer that night, convincing myself that disappearing would solve it. That illusion didn't last long. I woke up with my arm aching and my mouth painfully dry, unable to move. The moment I realized I was restrained didn't bring panic immediately. It brought confusion so intense it drowned everything else. My eyes moved slowly across the room, noticing the straps, the tubes, the bags filling beside me. Other beds surrounded mine, each holding someone in a similar state. Figures moved between them wearing medical clothing that felt wrong. They didn't speak, didn't acknowledge me as a person, only as a process that needed to continue. Every extraction left me weaker. They took blood until my vision blurred, then left me alone just long enough to recover enough for the next round. Time lost meaning. I lived in cycles of pain, emptiness, and brief moments of false rest. At some point, I stopped feeling fully alive. My body existed only to be drained and stabilized. Thoughts came slower. Memories blurred. I expected death constantly, and that expectation became routine. Then the routine broke. Sounds echoed through the facility that didn't belong there. Shouting, running, metal crashing. The figures stopped coming, and fear filled the silence they left behind. The door burst open violently, lights flooding the room. Police voices filled the space, loud and shocked. Hands cut my restraints and lifted me carefully, reacting visibly to my condition. I drifted in and out of consciousness after that. Hospital lights replaced the cold ceiling. Doctors talked around me, not to me. I learned later that I was found barely alive, malnourished, and close to organ failure. Recovery took longer than anyone expected. My body healed slowly, but my mind never caught up. Simple noises made me tense. Any medical environment made my chest tighten. I tried to rebuild my life, piece by piece, but everything felt fragile. Trust became impossible. I avoided people, systems, and anything that promised easy solutions. I survived, but survival didn't feel like a victory. It felt like being left behind after something had already taken the best parts of me. Even now, I wake up checking my arms, half expecting to see tubes again. This story is based on the real crime involving Daniel Moore, a 29-year-old man who in 2018 traveled to celebrate his first Valentine's Day with his girlfriend, Laura P., in Chile. What was meant to be a special night ended in a brutal homicide inside a private residence. According to case records, the scene was deliberately staged to resemble a romantic dinner, and the attacker had been hiding inside the house for hours. Laura was found deceased at the scene, while Daniel managed to escape with serious injuries. The suspect fled and has never been officially identified. I'm not the guy who makes a big deal out of dates, but this one mattered. It was my first Valentine's Day with Rachel, and she had been building it up for weeks. Every message hinted at something planned, something different. She kept saying I wouldn't forget it. Not in a teasing way, in a serious way. That alone should have been enough to make me slow down, but I didn't. I bought roses on my way there, more than I could comfortably carry. The guy at the shop wrapped them tight and wished me luck. I remember thinking how normal everything felt. Traffic, the radio, the weight of the flowers on my arm. It all felt stable, like nothing could slip out of place that night. Rachel lived alone in a small house on the edge of town. I'd been there plenty of times. Nothing fancy. One floor, a basement she never used, and a yard she never bothered with. When I parked, the lights were on inside. That calmed me. It told me she was home and waiting. I walked to the door rehearsing a stupid joke about Valentine's cliches. I was smiling like an idiot. I knocked expecting to hear her footsteps or her voice. Nothing happened. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open, still smiling, still relaxed, still thinking this was all part of her plan. Inside, the house smelled strongly of roses. Too strongly. Petals were scattered on the floor, forming a narrow path that led away from the living room. The lights were dim, not off, just low enough to make everything look intentional. This wasn't messy or rushed. This was planned. Before I followed the path, I stopped. That pause mattered. The silence wasn't normal for Rachel's place. No music, no TV, no background noise at all. I stood there holding the roses, listening to nothing, letting the quiet stretch longer than it should. The path led toward the basement door. I'd never been down there with her. She always said it was just storage. The door was open, and I could see a faint glow coming from below. Candlelight. Real candles, judging by the flicker on the walls. I called her name once. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't want to break the mood she'd clearly worked on. My voice didn't come back to me. It just vanished into the house. That's when I felt the first crack in my excitement. Small, but noticeable. I stepped closer to the basement door. The air was cooler there. The path of the petals continued down the stairs. Whatever she had planned, it was waiting for me below. Before going down, I stood at the top of the stairs longer than I wanted to admit. The candles below cast uneven light that moved constantly, never settling. The silence pressed on me. Not loud, not dramatic, just constant. I gripped the railing and focused on breathing slow and steady. I took the first step, then another. Each stair creaked under my weight. I counted them without meaning to. Halfway down, I noticed the smell change. The roses were still there, but something else mixed with it. Metallic, sharp. I ignored it because I wanted to. At the bottom, the basement opened up into a cleared space. A small table sat in the center with two chairs facing each other. Candles lined the walls and the floor, placed carefully. On the table was a heart-shaped cake, perfectly intact. Someone had put real effort into this. Then I saw Rachel. She was lying on her side, a few feet from the table. Her dress was dark, soaked unevenly. Blood pooled beneath her, thick and steel. Her eyes were open, not wide, just open like she'd been interrupted. My body reacted before my head did. I dropped the roses. My legs shook, but they didn't lock. I backed away, one step at a time, trying to understand what I was seeing. I wanted to scream her name. I didn't. My throat refused to cooperate. I turned slightly, thinking about the stairs, about running, about anything that wasn't this. That's when I heard movement behind me. Before I turned around, I stood frozen, listening. Slow footsteps, controlled. Someone else was in the basement with me. My heart beat so hard it hurt. I knew that if I turned, whatever was there would be real, and I wasn't ready for that. When I did turn, the man was already close. He wore a red dress, cheap but clean, and a wig that didn't quite sit right on his head. His makeup was heavy and uneven. His face was calm, not excited, not angry. Calm like this was a routine. He raised one hand, palm out, asking me to stop without saying it. I stopped. My back hit the wall. There was nowhere else to go. He spoke softly, almost politely. Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. This part always looks worse than it is. He gestured toward Rachel's body, then toward the table. Dinner's getting cold. I worked hard on this. I shook my head, trying to speak, failing again. My legs felt weak, like they might give out without warning. He noticed. His eyes flicked down, then back up. You don't have to stand. Sit, please. It's Valentine's Day. I didn't sit. I couldn't. He sighed, not frustrated, just disappointed. He stepped aside, giving me a clear view of the stairs, then blocked them again with a small shift of his foot. I never get at dates. People don't look at me that way. They look at you. She promised me one night where I wouldn't be alone. Before he moved again, I focused on the table, on the candles, on anything that wasn't his face. My breathing was shallow and fast. I tried to slow it down because dizziness would make everything worse. I needed to stay upright. I needed time. He pulled out one of the chairs and sat down smoothly. Sit with me. That's all I want. You don't have to eat. When I didn't move, he stood and crossed the space between us faster than I expected. He grabbed my arm, not hard enough to break skin, but hard enough to hurt. He guided me toward the chair and pushed me down. My knees buckled on impact with the seat. He sat across from me, adjusting his wig with care. She said you were kind. I hope that's true. He picked up a knife from the table. It wasn't a weapon, not yet. He used it to cut the cake, slow and precise. Each slice was neat. He placed one on my plate, then one on his. Every Valentine's Day I watched couples walk past my window, laughing, holding hands. Tonight is my turn. I shook my head again, finally managing words. Please, let me go. His expression tightened, just a little. No, not yet. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. She screamed more than I thought she would. I didn't like that. You're quieter. That helps. I felt something on my wrist, blood from where he grabbed me earlier. I stared at it, grounding myself in the detail. He followed my gaze and smiled faintly. Accidents happen. When I tried to stand, he moved instantly. He shoved the table into my legs, knocking the chair over. I hit the floor hard, pain shooting up my side. He was on me before I could crawl away, pressing a knee into my back. Stay, you're ruining it. Before he could do anything else, I reached back blindly and grabbed the nearest object. My hand closed around a candle holder. I swung without aim, hitting his arm. He yelped, more surprised than hurt, and shifted his weight. That was enough. I rolled onto my side and kicked, catching him in the stomach. He stumbled back, knocking over a chair. Candles fell, flames licking across the floor. Smoke filled the basement fast. I scrambled toward the stairs. My hands slipped on the steps, slick with sweat and something else. He grabbed my ankle, pulling me down hard. My head slammed into the wood. White spots burst across my vision. He dragged me back toward the table, breathing heavy now, the calm gone. You don't leave in the middle of a date? The fire spread. One of the shelves caught. Heat pressed against my skin. I kicked again, connecting with his face this time. Something cracked. He screamed, high and sharp. His grip loosened. I crawled, dragged myself, every movement burning. I reached the stairs again as the smoke thickened. This time, he didn't follow fast enough. I pulled myself up step by step, lungs screaming. I don't remember reaching the door. I remember cold air and collapsing onto the grass. I woke up in a hospital bed with bandages on my head and an oxygen tube in my nose. The room was quiet except for the machines. A police officer sat nearby. He didn't ask many questions. He already knew most of the answers. They never found him. The fire destroyed the basement and most of the house. Rachel's death was ruled a homicide. My statement filled pages. They told me I was lucky. I didn't feel lucky. Valentine's Day still comes every year. Stores filled with red hearts and cheap candy. Couples still walk past holding hands. I don't stop them. I don't look away either. I keep thinking about the table, the cake, the care he put into it, about how badly he wanted that night, about how close I came to staying there forever. I went into the forest because I had done it many times before. I recorded everything I explored, not because I thought something bad would happen, but because documenting it gave me structure and focus while walking alone for hours. That morning felt normal enough for me not to question my decisions, even when I parked farther than usual and noticed there were no other vehicles nearby. I told myself that silence was expected in places like this, and that isolation was part of the experience I was looking for. I started recording as soon as I crossed the tree line, describing the terrain and my route out loud so I could retrace my steps later if I needed. The forest looked ordinary, dense but familiar, and that false sense of normality made it easier to ignore the fact that I had no signal and no clear trail guiding me anymore. I noticed the first photograph when I stopped to adjust the camera strap, and at first, I thought it was trash left behind by someone else. When I got closer, I realized it was a printed missing person poster, carefully stapled to the tree at chest height. As I recorded it, I felt confused rather than scared, because the photo looked official and detailed, complete with a name and date. I stepped back to get a wider shot, and that's when I saw another poster on the next tree, and another one beyond that. I walked slowly, filming every image while trying to understand why they were placed so evenly, always facing the same direction. The deeper I went, the more posters appeared, and it became impossible to believe this was random or abandoned. I stopped to talk to the camera for a moment and listened, not expecting to hear anything specific, but needing to confirm that I was still alone. The quiet didn't reassure me, and for the first time, I considered turning back, even though curiosity kept pulling me forward. Before moving forward, I stood still and tried to calm my breathing, telling myself that panicking without proof would only make things worse. I checked my battery, adjusted the camera, and convinced myself to document a bit more before leaving. The posters started forming patterns, and that realization made my stomach tighten in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. They weren't just nailed to trees randomly. They were marking paths, intersections, and clearings that were invisible unless you followed the images. As I slowly rotated in place, filming the surrounding trees, I heard footsteps that didn't match my own movement. They were steady and synchronized, which made it impossible to dismiss them as animals or falling branches. When I spotted the group moving through the trees, my chest tightened and my legs felt unsteady, because there was something deeply wrong about how coordinated they were. Their shaved heads caught the light, and none of them spoke or reacted to my presence. I backed away carefully, trying not to draw attention, but the ground beneath me collapsed suddenly and yanked me upward with violent force. The trap snapped around my ankle and hoisted me into the air, slamming my body hard enough to knock the breath out of me. Hanging upside down, I shouted until my throat burned, watching the group drift away without urgency, as if they already knew I wasn't going anywhere. The pain in my leg grew sharper with every movement, and the realization that no one was coming settled in slowly and heavily. Hours passed as I remained suspended, fighting cramps, exhaustion, and fear that kept escalating as daylight disappeared. When footsteps finally returned, my relief vanished the moment I saw a single man standing beneath me, calmly observing my condition. He welcomes me. He cut the rope without warning, letting me crash to the ground, and immediately kicked me hard enough to curl my body inward. He didn't rush, didn't shout, and didn't seem angry, which made everything feel more deliberate and controlled. Before moving me, he waited in silence, scanning the trees as if listening for signals I couldn't hear. That pause made it clear that this wasn't improvisation, but routine, and that realization made my chest tighten with real fear. He dragged me through dense brush until we reached a truck hidden beneath branches and leaves, and tied my hands with practiced precision. Every bump during the drive sent pain through my body, and I couldn't tell how far we traveled or in which direction. The house appeared suddenly between trees, isolated and deliberately placed far from any road. Inside, everything was clean and stripped of personality, with a single chair fixed to the floor and restraints already attached. He shaved my head without explanation, pressing my skull down when I resisted, and every movement he made was calm and confident. He hit me repeatedly, not out of rage, but to keep me compliant, while asking questions that felt meaningless and disconnected. He slammed my head against the back of the chair to keep me still while shaving, warning me not to move if I wanted to keep my teeth intact. When I tried to pull my arms, he punched me in the stomach hard enough to still my breath and waited until I could breathe again, just to do it a second time. He pressed his boot against my injured ankle, applying slow pressure while watching my reaction, clearly measuring how much pain was enough without breaking me yet. Others entered the room later and watched without reacting, their faces blank and detached. One of them, however, looked at me longer than the rest, and that prolonged eye contact made me uneasy in a way I couldn't explain. Before anything changed, the man left the room and locked the door behind him, leaving me alone with the group. The silence that followed felt heavier than the violence that came before. The man who had been watching me stepped forward slowly, checking the door and the windows before kneeling beside the chair. His hands trembled as he cut the restraints, and the fear on his face felt real and uncontrolled. "You can't stay here." When he lifted his sleeve, I saw a scar that matched one of the posters I had filmed earlier, and the connection hit me hard enough to make my breathing uneven. He wasn't part of this by choice, and whatever held him there had already broken him. He pointed toward a back exit and stayed behind as I stumbled through the door, barely able to stay upright. I ran without direction, driven by panic rather than strategy, falling and getting up repeatedly until I reached the road. The police listened and followed me back into the forest, taking my account seriously enough to search the area thoroughly. I showed them the footage I had uploaded earlier, explaining the layout and the paths marked by the posters. When we arrived, there was nothing left to find. The trees were bare, the ground showed no signs of disturbance, and the house simply did not exist. Search teams returned multiple times, but every attempt ended the same way, with no evidence and no explanation. The people from the posters remained missing, and no new leads ever surfaced. Life didn't return to normal after that, even though the world around me moved on quickly. My injuries healed enough to function, but the memory of that place stayed sharp and persistent. Whatever happened in that forest didn't end when I escaped. And the fact that nothing was found makes it clear that the system protecting those people is still intact. I don't think the missing were meant to be found, and I'm certain that I was never meant to leave.
The first thing people notice about this story is his name, but that is never where it really begins. It begins with how safe I thought I was, how convinced I was that nothing truly bad could happen. I tell this now because silence helped him for too long, and because pretending it was just a bad relationship almost killed me. When I met Lawrence, he was already known, not famous, but close enough that people recognized him in bars and restaurants. Close enough that strangers smiled at him like he had already proven something. He spoke softly, smiled easily, and never raised his voice in public. He liked to say he respected women, and people believed him because he said it so calmly. At the beginning, He treated me like something fragile he wanted to protect. He insisted on driving me everywhere, paying for everything, and planning my days around his schedule. When I thanked him, he corrected me and said I didn't need to thank him for being a man. I thought that sounded mature. I thought it meant stability. What I did not understand yet was that protection, when you do not ask for it, slowly turns into a cage. The control did not arrive violently, and that is why I missed it. It arrived wrapped in concern, in advice, in long explanations about danger and stress, and how people like him lived under constant pressure. He told me I did not need to work so much. He told me my friends were careless. He told me the city was not safe for someone like me. Before anything physical happened, my world became very small. He did not forbid me from leaving the house at first, but he made it exhausting. Every plan required a discussion. Every errand came with questions. If I wanted to go out alone, he wanted updates. If I stayed too long, he wanted reasons. It was easier to stay home than to explain myself. The drinking became impossible to ignore. Bottles appeared faster than they disappeared. He started missing training sessions and laughed about it like it was a joke the coaches just did not get. When the suspension came after he drove drunk, the joke ended and the house changed. He stayed home all day, watching games, replays, interviews, and old highlights. Football never stopped. Each touchdown replay felt like it pulled something dark out of him, something tight and restless that needed an outlet. I did not know yet that I was becoming that outlet. After the suspension, the tension stopped hiding. The days grew heavier, slower, and more dangerous because I never knew which version of him I would face. Sometimes he ignored me completely, sitting inches from the screen with a drink in his hand, jaw clenched, eyes fixed like the game was happening inside his head. Other times he followed me through the house, correcting how I walked, how I cleaned, how I spoke. Before the first real beating, there were hours of pressure that felt unbearable. One afternoon, he accused me of distracting him during a game. I was standing behind the couch, not speaking, not moving, just existing in the room. He stood up suddenly, grabbed my arm, and squeezed until my fingers went numb. He did not shout. He spoke slowly and told me I needed to learn when to disappear. When I tried to pull away, he shoved me backward into the wall. My head hit hard enough to make my vision blur. He stared at me afterward, breathing heavy, like he was waiting for something from me. When I started crying, he walked away in disgust. From that day on, fear became part of my routine. I moved carefully. I spoke less. I slept lightly. I learned the sound of his steps and the rhythm of his drinking. I knew when to stay silent and when to answer quickly. None of it was enough. The night he dragged me to the basement did not begin with shouting. It began with football highlights playing too loudly and him drinking faster than usual. I tried to stay upstairs, but he called my name, slow and sharp, and I knew ignoring him would only make things worse. When I reached the living room, he accused me of disrespecting him, of planning to leave, of thinking I was better than him. Before I could move away, he grabbed my hair and pulled me toward the stairs. I tried to hold on to the railing, but he kicked my hands away and dragged me step by step, my back hitting each edge, my body twisting in ways that left bruises everywhere. The pain was loud and constant, and he did not stop even when I screamed. The basement was dark, cold, and empty. He threw me inside, locked the door, and turned the light off. For 5 days, that room was my entire world. He gave me little water, never enough to feel okay, just enough to keep me alive. Once a day, he threw in a piece of hard bread like I was an animal. He told me this was what happened to women who forgot their place. He told me no one would come. He told me I deserved it. The psychological damage was worse than the hunger. He came down randomly, sometimes calm, sometimes furious, sometimes drunk and rambling. He made me beg. He laughed when I cried. He threatened to leave me there forever. By the 3rd day, I stopped counting time and started counting footsteps. When he finally unlocked the door and pulled me upstairs, my legs barely worked. Before the final assault, the house felt like it was holding its breath. I told him I was leaving. I said it clearly. I said it slowly. I said I would go to the police. His reaction was immediate and terrifying because there was no explosion, no screaming, no warning. He pushed me against the wall and wrapped his hands around my neck. His grip was steady, calculated, and strong. I tried to hit him, but my arms were weak from days without food. The pressure increased slowly, like he wanted me to understand exactly what was happening. The room spun. My lungs burned, my thoughts scattered. I could hear the television behind him, the crowd cheering as if nothing in the world was wrong. When I collapsed, he let go. I hit the floor and could not move. He stepped over me, grabbed another drink, and passed out on the couch. I stayed still for a long time, afraid that even breathing might wake him. I escaped while he slept. I did not take anything with me. I did not look back. I ran until my chest hurt and my vision blurred, then I ran more. When the police arrived, they took photos, wrote reports, and promised protection. He was arrested, then released, then protected by the same system that loved his talent more than it cared about my life. Years passed, but his violence did not stop. Arrests followed him. Charges piled up. Guards reported attacks. Cellmates feared him. His behavior grew more unstable, more dangerous, until it finally ended the only way it ever could. When I heard what he did in prison and what he did to himself afterward, my body reacted before my mind did. Cold, shaking, numbness. Justice came late, but it came loud. Every football game reminds me how easily violence is excused when talent is involved. People ask why I stayed, why I didn't leave sooner, why I didn't see it coming. The truth is simple and ugly. Fear works slowly, control hides well, and monsters rarely look like monsters at the beginning.
Lawrence Phillips was a former NFL and college football star whose career was marked as much by extreme violence as by athletic talent. Despite repeated incidents of domestic abuse and criminal behavior during his playing years, he continued to be protected by teams and institutions as long as he performed on the field. After his career ended, the violence escalated rather than stopped. In 2015, while serving a prison sentence for multiple offenses, Phillips murdered his cellmate and later took his own life.
I lived in that house for 2 years before the night that changed everything. It was a typical college rental, the kind of place where 6 roommates split the rent and learned to navigate each other's schedules and quirks. We had parties on weekends, study sessions during finals, lazy Sunday mornings where we all crowded into the kitchen making breakfast and complaining about hangovers. It felt safe, familiar, like the kind of place where nothing truly terrible could ever happen. I was wrong about that in the worst possible way. November in northern Washington always brought early darkness and cold that seeped through the windows no matter how high we cranked the heat. That weekend started like any other. My roommates going out to parties and bars while I stayed home, exhausted from a long week of classes and part-time work. I went to bed early, around midnight, while the others were still out. The house was quiet when I fell asleep, just the usual creaks and settling sounds I had learned to ignore over the months of living there. I woke up sometime after 4 in the morning to the sound of voices. At first I thought my roommates had come home and were talking in the hallway, maybe a little drunk and louder than they realized. I remember being annoyed, thinking about how I had an early class and needed sleep, but not concerned. People coming home late was normal in a house full of college students. I rolled over, pulled my pillow over my head, and tried to drift back to sleep. Then I heard something that made my eyes snap open. A thud, heavy and solid, like something falling or being dropped on the floor above me. Then another sound, harder to describe, somewhere between a gasp and a cry that cut off too quickly. My room was on the first floor, directly below one of the bedrooms upstairs, and sound carried easily through the old floors and thin walls. I lay there frozen, listening, my heart starting to pound, even though I did not yet understand why. The house went silent again, completely, unnaturally silent. No footsteps, no voices, no sound of doors opening or closing. Just that heavy quiet that feels wrong when you know other people are supposed to be home. I told myself I was overreacting, that maybe someone had dropped something or stumbled while drunk, that everything was fine and I should go back to sleep. But something kept me awake, some primal instinct that recognized danger even when my conscious mind refused to accept it. I heard footsteps then, slow and deliberate, moving through the hallway upstairs. Not the familiar rhythm of my roommate's walks, but something different, heavier, more purposeful. The steps moved from one room to another, pausing at doorways, and with each pause, my fear grew stronger. I wanted to get up, to check on everyone, to call out and ask if everything was okay, but I could not move. Terror had frozen me in place, my body refusing to cooperate with what my mind was telling it to do. The footsteps descended the stairs. I could track their progress by sound alone, each step bringing whoever it was closer to my floor, closer to my room. They passed by my door, so close I could see the shadow of feet blocking the light from under the door frame, and continued toward the back of the house. I heard the sliding door that led to the backyard open and then close, and then nothing. Just silence again, deeper and more terrible than before. I do not know how long I lay there, too terrified to move, trying to process what I had heard. Part of me wanted to believe it was nothing, just roommates coming home drunk or moving furniture or doing something that had a perfectly reasonable explanation. But another part of me, the part that kept me frozen in my bed with my door locked, knew something was horribly wrong. When the sun finally came up, I found the courage to leave my room. The house was too quiet, none of the usual morning sounds of people getting ready for class or making coffee. I climbed the stairs slowly, my legs shaking, and that is when I saw the first door standing open, the room beyond it visible in a way that made my stomach drop. I did not go inside. I could see enough from the hallway to know I needed to call for help. I ran back downstairs, grabbed my phone with trembling hands, and dialed emergency services. My voice barely worked when the dispatcher answered, the words coming out in gasps and sobs as I tried to explain that something terrible had happened, that my roommates were not responding, that I had heard things during the night but did not understand until now what they meant. The police arrived within minutes, flooding the house with officers and paramedics and people in protective gear. They made me wait outside while they went through the house, and I stood on the lawn in the cold morning air, watching neighbors gather and whisper, knowing from the expressions on the officers' faces that it was worse than I had imagined. 4 of my roommates were gone. The people I had lived with, laughed with, shared meals and late-night conversations with, were all dead, murdered while I slept 1 floor below. The guilt came immediately and has never left. I heard everything, the footsteps and the sounds and the moments when I could have done something, called the police, screamed, done anything except lie frozen in my bed convincing myself it was nothing. The investigators told me later that there was nothing I could have done, that calling out or intervening would have only added me to the list of victims. But that knowledge does not ease the weight of knowing I was there, alive and safe, while my friends were being killed just feet above my head. They caught him eventually. A graduate student from a nearby university who had been watching our house, studying our routines, planning his attack with the kind of methodical precision that makes my skin crawl. He confessed, avoided the death penalty, and will spend the rest of his life in prison. But that does not bring back the people who died, does not undo the trauma of that night, does not stop me from waking up at 4 in the morning convinced I can hear footsteps in the hallway. I moved out of that house the day the police cleared it as a crime scene. I could not stay, could not sleep in that room knowing what had happened above me, could not walk through those hallways without seeing the shadows and hearing the sounds that will echo in my memory forever. I left college, moved back home with my parents, and spent months in therapy trying to process the survivor's guilt that threatened to drown me. People ask me how I am doing now, if I have moved on, if time has made it easier to bear. The truth is that some things do not fade. I still check every lock multiple times before bed. I still cannot sleep on the first floor of any building. I still wake up in the middle of the night listening for sounds that should not be there, my body remembering that terror even when my mind tries to forget. The worst part is not what I saw the next morning or the months of investigation and trial that followed. The worst part is knowing that I heard everything, that for those crucial minutes when my friends needed help, I was paralyzed by fear, unable to act. And that hesitation is something I will carry for the rest of my life. I survived that night, but I am not sure I will ever truly escape it. If you ever hear something that feels wrong, if your instincts scream that danger is near, trust that feeling. Call for help. Do not wait. Do not rationalize. Do not convince yourself it is nothing, because sometimes the sounds in the dark are exactly what you fear they are, and hesitation can mean the difference between life and death. I learned that lesson too late to save my friends, but maybe someone else can learn it in time to save themselves.
First time I realized something was wrong with Lisa, I should have left immediately. We had known each other since high school, grown up together. For many years, being with her felt inevitable, like our lives were tied together by default rather than choice. Things started to fall apart when our lives stopped moving in the same direction. I started feeling emotionally closer to someone at work, and that scared me enough to admit the truth to myself. I was no longer in love with Lisa. When I told her I wanted to separate, I expected pain, anger, maybe resentment. What I didn't expect was the way she reacted. Lisa refused to accept the breakup, and her reaction went far beyond sadness. She cried for hours, then screamed, then collapsed into long periods where she barely spoke or moved. She stopped eating regularly and barely slept. I started checking on her out of guilt rather than love. I told myself I was being kind, even though I knew staying close only confused things more. About a week later, she told me she felt physically unwell and had gone to the doctor on her own. When she came back, she sat across from me and said she was pregnant, already a few months along. She said this explained everything and that we had no choice but to stay together. I was stunned, and my first reaction was disbelief mixed with panic. But I didn't accuse her of lying. She cried and said she needed me, that the baby needed us. Against my better judgment, I agreed to try again. We reconciled quickly, moved back into routine, and I even proposed. It felt like the responsible thing to do. Lisa became calmer, focused on the pregnancy, and I threw myself into work to avoid thinking too much. As the weeks passed, small things began to feel off. Lisa always went to medical appointments alone or with relatives, saying it was a private experience and that pregnancy brought up things she wasn't ready to share. She also told me not to look at her stomach because it caused her anxiety, and she asked me to respect that boundary. I did, even though it felt strange. Her belly did grow, and that was enough to quiet my concerns. I told myself I was overthinking it. In the following weeks, there was a lot of tension between us. She was very stressed about the pregnancy until she joined a charity group that rescued stray dogs, which surprised me because she never liked animals before. She talked about it with intense enthusiasm, saying it gave her purpose and helped her focus on the future. I felt relieved, even proud, because it looked like she was finding balance again. That's where she met Sarah, another pregnant woman who was due around the same time. Lisa talked about her nonstop, and soon Sarah started visiting our apartment. They sat for hours discussing pregnancy, parenting, and future plans. They always talked about how our children would grow up together and be great friends. I met Sarah's husband, and we started having dinner together. I hadn't felt that hopeful in years, and that made me blind. We'd never been so happy, even as a couple. Everything was fantastic, until the day Lisa gave birth. One morning, a stranger called me, telling me that Lisa had been found on the street, holding a newborn baby. When I arrived, there were people gathered around her, whispering and staring. Lisa was sitting on the pavement with the baby pressed against her chest, both of them covered in blood. Her clothes were soaked, her hands were shaking, and her face looked pale and distant, like she wasn't fully there. She kept repeating that the baby was fine and that everything was okay, even though nothing about the scene looked okay at all. I was angry, confused, and terrified all at once, asking why no one had helped her and how this could have happened without anyone calling me. Someone had already called an ambulance, and when the paramedics arrived, they tried to take the baby to check him. Lisa reacted immediately, pulling the baby closer and screaming that no one was allowed to touch him. She refused to stand up, refused to answer questions, and kept insisting that they didn't need a hospital. Watching her fight them felt unreal, like I was looking at someone I didn't fully recognize anymore. The paramedics had to force her onto the stretcher, and I followed the ambulance in my car, my thoughts spinning out of control. I kept telling myself that births could go wrong, that shock did strange things to people. But deep down, I knew this behavior wasn't normal. At the hospital, everything moved fast, but not in a reassuring way. Doctors separated Lisa from the baby despite her protests, and security had to intervene again because she refused to calm down. A doctor finally pulled me aside and spoke carefully, choosing words that already sounded wrong before I fully understood them. He said Lisa showed no physical signs of pregnancy or childbirth, no signs of labor, no signs of recovery, nothing that matched her story. I argued, raised my voice, insisted there had to be a mistake, but the doctor didn't waver. Not long after that, police officers arrived and asked to speak with me. They asked about Sarah, and the moment they said her name, my stomach dropped. One of them told me that Sarah had been found dead in her home earlier that day. She had been murdered. Her abdomen had been cut open, and her baby was gone. They told me that Lisa was the last person to see Sarah alive, that phone records and messages confirmed it. They told me the baby Lisa brought in matched Sarah's pregnancy timeline, not Lisa's. I felt dizzy, like the floor was tilting under my feet. The investigation moved quickly, and there was no room left for denial. Medical tests confirmed that Lisa had never been pregnant at all. The growing belly, the appointments, the symptoms, all of it had been fabricated. The baby wasn't ours. He was Sarah's. Police explained how Lisa had planned everything in advance: the fake pregnancy to keep me from leaving, the charity group to meet vulnerable women, the careful choice of Sarah because they were supposed to be due at the same time. Every step had been calculated, patient, and deliberate. When I was finally allowed to see Lisa, it was through a glass partition at the police station. She looked exhausted, but calm, and when she spoke, she didn't sound desperate. She said she had done what she had to do, and that this was the only way we could have a family. Hearing her say that made my chest tighten in a way I can't properly explain. The baby was returned to Sarah's family, and I never tried to see him again. Court hearings followed, and I attended them all, listening as the crime was described in full detail. Each time it felt like the air was being pushed out of my lungs, but I stayed silent because there was nothing left to say. Lisa was sentenced to death. I didn't feel relief or justice. I didn't feel like anything had been resolved. It felt like the ending to a story I never agreed to be a part of. I think constantly about the signs I ignored and the moments I explained away because facing the truth would have been uncomfortable. I trusted someone completely, and that trust was used to destroy another family. Lisa Montgomery was an American woman convicted of murdering Bobby Jo Stinnett in 2004 by strangling her and cutting her abdomen open to steal her unborn baby. Montgomery had pretended to be pregnant for months and used that lie to gain Stinnett's trust before attacking her in her home. The baby survived and was returned to the family, while Montgomery was arrested the same day and later in 2021 sentenced to death, becoming the first woman executed by the U.S. federal government in nearly 70 years. The thing that still bothers me is that nothing looked wrong that day. The house was clean, quiet, and normal. The kind of normal you don't question because you live inside it every day. I was home, my wife was home, and our daughters were safe under the same roof. Or at least, that's what I believed at the time. We lived in a 2-story house with thin walls and wooden floors that creaked when someone walked too fast. Our oldest daughter was 6, our youngest 3, and we had built our entire routine around keeping them safe without making them feel trapped. That balance mattered to us more than anything. Security cameras were part of that routine. They were installed early, mostly to calm our nerves, mostly to check on the kids when they played alone. We had one in the living room, positioned high in the corner, facing the floor where the girls spent most of their time. That afternoon, our oldest daughter was alone in the living room, playing with her dolls. My wife was upstairs folding clothes, and I was in my office wearing headphones, trying to finish work. Nothing felt urgent. Nothing demanded attention. That's why it worked. The changes didn't arrive all at once. They came quietly and spread through our days in ways that felt easy to excuse. Our daughter started lying about small things. Things that didn't matter enough to fight over, but didn't feel like her either. She pushed her sister, took money, and broke objects without showing guilt. We talked to her calmly, sitting at her level, asking questions instead of raising our voices. She listened, nodded, and promised not to do it again. But her eyes felt distant, like she was thinking about something else entirely while we spoke. At night, her questions changed. She asked about blood, about secrets, about who could see her when the lights were off. My wife said kids go through phases, and I wanted to believe her, because the alternative felt too heavy to name. The first camera alert came while I was at work. Living room audio detected. When I opened the feed, I saw my daughter sitting on the floor, her back straight, her toys untouched. She wasn't talking. She was listening. Then, a voice came through the speaker. "Don't be scared. I'm Santa." My chest tightened in a way I didn't understand yet. After hearing that voice, I couldn't sit still anymore. I replayed the footage again and again, listening carefully, trying to find a glitch or a recording error that could explain what I heard. The voice sounded calm, controlled, and close, as if the man was standing right inside our living room. That night, my wife and I watched hours of video together. We didn't speak much. Every time the voice appeared, our daughter reacted the same way, sitting still, answering softly and following instructions without hesitation. There was no fear in her behavior, only attention and trust. Before the next incident, tension settled into the house in a way that didn't fade. We stopped leaving her alone, even for short moments, and we whispered when the girls were asleep, afraid that walls or screens could somehow listen. Sleep became shallow and broken for both of us. The voice returned when she was alone for less than 2 minutes. This time it asked her to take coins from a drawer and hide them. When she did, the man praised her, speaking slowly and kindly, promising rewards for being helpful and quiet. Later that same day, the instructions changed. He told her that her sister needed to learn a lesson, that crying made Santa sad, and that small punishments helped children grow. Watching the footage, my wife covered her mouth while our daughter hit her sister without anger, without hesitation, as if she were completing a task. By then, fear wasn't abstract anymore. It sat in our conversations, in our movements, and in the way we watched our daughter closely without knowing how to protect her from something we couldn't touch. Every time she glanced at the camera, my stomach tightened. Before the next escalation, the house felt crowded, even when we were alone. Every sound pulled our attention, and every quiet moment felt unsafe. We started sleeping with our bedroom door locked, something we'd never done before. One night, my wife woke up screaming. Our daughter stood next to the bed holding a kitchen knife with both hands, her face blank, her body stiff. She said Santa told her to fix something inside her mother's arms. She looked confused when we shouted. After that night, I stopped pretending we could handle this alone. The fear was constant, sitting under every thought, making every normal moment feel fragile. I unplugged the cameras, but part of me already knew that wouldn't end it. Before he spoke directly to me, I stood alone in the living room staring at the dark lens, trying to control my voice while asking whoever was listening to leave us alone. I didn't expect an answer, but I got one immediately. I was waiting for you to talk to me. His voice sounded pleased, relaxed, and confident, and he explained how long he had been watching us, how easy it was to gain our daughter's trust, and how much he enjoyed seeing how far he could push her. He described our routine in detail, naming things only someone inside our life could know. The power went out that night, and the silence that followed felt heavy and dangerous. The front door handle moved slowly, testing the lock, and footsteps crossed the living room with no urgency at all. He said he had already asked our daughter to unlock the door earlier, just in case. That night, I didn't wait anymore. In a moment of pure desperation, I lost control. I walked through the house, ripping the cameras off the walls with my bare hands, pulling cables, throwing plastic and metal to the floor without thinking. I just needed them gone. That's when my daughter spoke from the corner of the living room. She said I couldn't take all of them. When I asked what she meant, she lifted one of her toys and showed it to me. It was a little bear that she had been carrying everywhere for weeks. One of its eyes was dark and round, and when I looked closer, I understood why. There was a camera inside it. When I grabbed the toy, it warmed in my hand, and a voice came through the small speaker hidden inside the plastic. He calmly said, "Are you sure you want to remove all the cameras?" He asked what would happen to my daughters if no one was watching them. He said he already knew my routine, the streets we walked, the school they went to every morning, and the places we thought were safe. My mind raced through everything he said, every possibility, every mistake I'd already made. For a moment, I considered leaving the toy where it was, just to keep him talking, just to feel like I knew where he was. Instead, I smashed it against the floor until it broke. That night, I called the police. They never found him. They never found a name, a face, or a location. Eventually, nothing strange happened again. No more voices, no more sounds, and no more signs of interference. We stopped using cameras completely. Maybe it really was just a disturbed man doing this for fun. But we never stopped watching our surroundings. Because even without cameras, the feeling of being watched never fully left us.
Who's that?
I'm your best friend. You can do whatever you want right now. You can mess up your room. You can break your TV. You can do whatever you want.
Who is that?
I'm your best friend. I'm Santa Claus.
If you ever lose someone and nobody finds the body, the story never really ends. This is not a story about closure or learning something from pain, because nothing good came out of it. We were on vacation and we went skiing, just a normal adventure for a couple. The place was busy but controlled, with clear signs, open trails, and rescue teams everywhere, which made everything feel safe. She was always more confident than me on skis, faster and less cautious, while I preferred staying on wide trails and following the rules. We joked about that difference constantly, and that day was no different, which is why nothing felt dangerous or serious at first. The trail split near the middle of the mountain, with one path clearly marked and crowded, and another one narrower, quieter, but still officially open. She stopped, pointed at the narrow path, and smiled like it was an obvious choice, while I hesitated and told her I would take the main trail and meet her at the bottom. She didn't argue. She just pushed forward and started going down without looking back, moving fast and confidently like she always did. I watched her red jacket for a few seconds until the curve of the slope swallowed her completely. When I reached the bottom of my trail, she wasn't there, and at first I assumed she was just ahead, maybe talking to someone or adjusting her gear. I waited, checked my phone, walked around the lift area, and told myself to relax because there was no reason to panic yet. Minutes passed, then more minutes, and the place started to empty as the afternoon faded, which made every absence feel louder. I tried calling her, sending messages, checking every nearby spot where she could have stopped, but nothing made sense anymore. That was the moment I went to ski patrol, still hoping this was just a misunderstanding, still believing that in a few minutes she would appear annoyed and laughing about how dramatic I was being. Once the search officially started, everything slowed down in a way that made my thoughts race even more. I gave her name, her photos, her clothes, repeating the same information to different people until it stopped feeling real. Rescue teams went up and down the mountain with dogs, radios, and snowmobiles, while I stood nearby pretending to be useful, even though there was nothing I could actually do. As night fell, the cold became sharper and the mountain looked empty and indifferent. I was told to go inside and rest, but I refused, staying awake near the base, watching the darkness and imagining her somewhere out there, waiting and getting colder. The next day brought helicopters, more people, and more organized searching, but also a change in tone that I noticed immediately. The questions became more careful, more repetitive, as if they were already checking for mistakes rather than expecting good news. Before the real fear fully settled, I was taken into a small office where they explained survival limits, exposure times, and weather conditions, using calm voices that did not match the situation at all. Days passed and hope started changing shape. Posters were printed, messages spread online, and her parents arrived with faces that looked older than they should have. Searches continued, but they became shorter and more cautious, focusing on areas already checked. When they finally told us that chances of survival were extremely low, I argued quietly, insisting that she was strong, experienced, and capable, but my voice sounded weak even to me. The official decision to stop active searching felt worse than hearing about death, because there was nothing final about it. People slowly returned to their lives and messages of support became less frequent. I went back home, kept working, and answered questions with short explanations, while inside I stayed stuck on that mountain, replaying the moment she disappeared and wondering how a single choice could erase a person so completely. 5 years later, on a night, the doorbell rang. I opened the door expecting a delivery or a neighbor, and my brain took a few seconds to understand what my eyes were seeing. She was standing there, alive, clean, and calm, wearing clothes I had never seen before, with darker hair cut shorter than I remembered. Her face looked relaxed, almost happy, and that expression hit me harder than any injury ever could, because it did not match 5 years of cold fear and silence. She said my name in a normal tone and stepped inside without hesitation, looking around the apartment as if she was visiting a place she already knew. I started asking questions immediately, too many at once, but she avoided every single one without getting defensive, repeating that she did not want to talk about the mountain. When she said she had nowhere to go, I let her stay because my thoughts were a mess. After all, part of me was still frozen on that slope waiting for her to come back. The first night was quiet but uncomfortable, with small things that did not feel right if I paid attention. She barely touched her food, chewing slowly and stopping for long moments like she forgot what she was doing, while her eyes stayed fixed on nothing in particular. Over the next days, her behavior became harder to explain. She woke up before sunrise every morning and stood by the window for long stretches, not looking outside but slightly downward, like she was watching something move just out of sight. Sometimes I would find her standing in the hallway or the living room, completely still, eyes open, breathing slow, as if she had paused in the middle of an action and never resumed it. When I spoke to her during those moments, she reacted late, turning her head slowly and smiling like she was embarrassed to be caught. One night, I followed a noise into the backyard and found her crouched low, scooping dirt into her mouth with both hands, chewing without urgency or disgust. When I called her name, she didn't answer, and when I touched her shoulder, she flinched sharply and stared at me like she didn't recognize me. She apologized afterward, smiling again, saying she was just tired and adjusting, but the explanation did not fit what I had seen. I started sleeping less, locking my door sometimes without fully admitting why, and watching her closely during the day. What scared me the most was how normal she acted between those moments, laughing at jokes and talking about the future like nothing had ever interrupted her life. That contrast made it harder to convince myself that this was just trauma. Whatever came back was not the same person who disappeared on that mountain. The tension inside the apartment kept building quietly. That night, the house was silent until fast footsteps echoed down the hallway. My door opened violently and she stood there holding a kitchen knife, her face focused and empty. She moved toward me without speaking, swinging the knife with force that felt practiced, hiding the mattress and tearing fabric as I rolled away and fell to the floor. I tried to block her arm, but she was stronger than I expected, and the blade cut my arm just enough to hurt and distract me. I pushed her with everything I had, sending her into the wall hard enough to make a loud crack, and for a second I thought she was injured. Instead, she looked at me and started laughing loud and uncontrolled, like the situation amused her deeply. She ran out of the room and out of the apartment, still laughing as she disappeared down the stairs, leaving behind blood, broken furniture, and a silence that felt heavier than any noise she had made. The police took my statement seriously, but didn't find her. They looked at old photos, listened carefully, and eventually reached the same dead end everyone else had reached before. No sightings followed, no updates, and no explanation that made sense. Sometimes I wonder if the woman who came back was ever really her, or if something else learned how to walk, speak, and smile like her after she disappeared. People think obsession is easy to spot. That's not true. Obsession can sound calm, reasonable, and even caring when you first hear it, and that's how it slips into your life without asking for permission. I met Galen when I was barely holding things together. I was working, studying, and trying to act older than I felt. He was charming in a strange way, confident when talking about football, especially college football, like it was the only thing in the world that made sense to him. At first, that focus felt reassuring, like he had something solid to stand on. He talked about the Colorado Buffaloes constantly, but one player's name always came up: Ray Carruth. Galen talked about him like you talk about someone you actually knew, someone whose choices mattered beyond the field. I didn't question it back then because I didn't know what I was listening to yet. When I got pregnant, everything accelerated. There was no long discussion, no real planning. We moved in together because neither of us could afford not to. The house was small, the walls were thin, and every sound traveled, which meant there was never any real privacy or silence. At that point, I still believed things could stabilize. I didn't know I was already inside a story that was heading somewhere violent. Galen's admiration didn't stay abstract. It turned physical, visual, and constant. He started dressing like Carruth, copying old photos and game footage down to the smallest details. Same jacket, same posture, same way of walking into a room like everyone should notice. He didn't just talk about Carruth, he studied him. He repeated phrases Carruth used in interviews, adjusted his voice to match his tone, and even practiced expressions in the mirror. It stopped feeling like fandom and started feeling like rehearsal. Our conversations narrowed fast. Everything led back to Carruth. Money problems, relationships, responsibility, fatherhood. Galen always framed it the same way, saying the world punishes men who get trapped by expectations. He said football players were proof of that. Before the arguments, there was always a stretch of silence that felt deliberate. He would sit scrolling through court documents or watching interviews, barely blinking, barely reacting. When I mentioned separating, he didn't raise his voice. He smiled and explained why that wouldn't work. He talked about unity, legacy, and not repeating mistakes. Even though I never said those words myself, I started to feel like my role in my own life was shrinking. The first physical incident happened during one of those long silences, when I tried to leave the room to avoid another lecture about loyalty and sacrifice. His hand closed around my wrist, not crushing it, but firm enough to stop me completely. He didn't apologize and he didn't look angry. He explained his behavior like he was correcting a misunderstanding. That night, he wore a Buffalo's jersey that barely fit him and stood in front of the mirror for a long time, adjusting it and talking quietly to himself. I stayed on the bed listening, trying to slow my breathing while my thoughts raced in circles I couldn't control. Before the next incident, tension built in smaller ways. He slept less, paced more, and muttered names and dates like they were instructions. He stopped asking how I felt and started telling me what I was supposed to feel. When the news about Caruth's arrest came out, I expected denial or anger. Instead, Galen reacted with calm approval. He watched the coverage closely and nodded along as if each detail confirmed something he already believed. He made a hard choice. Some people don't understand what it takes. The way he said hard choice stayed with me because it sounded less like commentary and more like preparation. Their star player had been accused of murdering his pregnant partner to avoid paying child support. It disgusts me just thinking about it. Meanwhile, we were going to have a child together. For me, Gail's unhealthy obsession with Ray ended there. After that, Galen changed. Not explosively, but methodically. He started attending court hearings, sitting quietly in the back, taking notes and coming home energized. He talked about respect, about controlling the narrative, about how history remembers men who act decisively. Before every argument, there was a heavy buildup where he watched footage late into the night, pausing and rewinding specific moments. I could hear him breathing faster, tapping his fingers, whispering comments under his breath. When I finally said I was leaving, I expected yelling or threats. Instead, he stayed calm, which made everything worse. He told me leaving would complicate things and that complicated situations force people to make mistakes. You're not thinking clearly right now. I moved in with my sister and blocked his number. For a few days, nothing happened. That absence felt artificial, like the pause before something breaks. Then messages started arriving from unfamiliar numbers. Long messages explaining why separation would hurt everyone involved, why suffering could be avoided, why decisive action was sometimes mercy. I stopped reading them halfway through, but the tone lingered in my head. At night, I kept replaying his voice, not loud or aggressive, but certain, as if certainty itself could justify anything. The day he came to my sister's house, tension filled the space long before I saw him. Every sound outside made my attention snap toward the door, and my thoughts jumped ahead faster than I could slow them down. When his voice came through the door, it was controlled and steady, like he was trying not to alarm anyone nearby. I didn't open it right away. I stood there listening, focusing on his breathing, on the rhythm of his words, trying to predict his next move. When he forced the door open, he didn't rush me. He stepped inside calmly and closed it behind him, as if this was a private conversation that had been interrupted earlier. "You're not going to ruin my life. Gail is right, you shouldn't exist. I'm ruined because of you and the future baby." I backed away toward the kitchen, keeping distance without freezing. He followed at the same pace, explaining himself, describing a future where problems didn't exist anymore. His hand moved toward his jacket, slow and deliberate. I grabbed a lamp and swung it, hitting his arm hard enough to make him step back. He adjusted quickly and kept moving, his expression tightening but never breaking into panic. When he grabbed my hair, pain shot through my scalp, but I didn't stop moving. I hit his face with my elbow, felt the impact, and used the moment to break free. I ran, screaming, not stopping until neighbors came out and someone called the police. After his arrest, everything felt unreal. I gave my statement multiple times, each version feeling less connected to my body, like I was describing events that happened to someone else. I didn't feel brave or relieved. I felt emptied out. In court, he never looked at me. He stared forward wearing that same serious expression. The restraining order and sentence followed. I raised my child alone. Sometimes I still think about how calm Galen was, even at the worst moments, and how certainty can be more dangerous than anger. I don't feel victorious. I tell this story so others understand that terror doesn't always announce itself. This story mentions Ray Caruth, an NFL wide receiver whose career ended after he orchestrated the murder of his pregnant girlfriend, Cherika Adams, in 1999. Caruth arranged for Adams to be ambushed and shot while he followed in another car. Adams survived long enough to give birth to their son, who was left with permanent brain damage. Caruth was convicted for his role in the crime and sentenced to prison, becoming one of the most notorious criminal cases involving a professional football player.